In Luke chapter 12, Jesus is teaching his disciples, and then he turns to the crowds. These are the people that are on the outskirts, and they're pressed in close. And he says to them, whenever you see a cloud rising out of the west, immediately you say, a shower is coming. And so it is. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, there is hot weather. And there is. Hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky and the earth, but how is it you do not discern the times? He's very harsh. In fact, there's an edge to Jesus here. And the edge is because they have the scriptures. They should have known that the Messiah was going to be there. The Bible tells us in Daniel chapter 9 that there are 483 years or 69 sevens from the command to restore and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, which we know when that was, to Nehemiah, and then there would be 483 years until the Messiah. If you take that command and you add the 483 years, you actually come to the ministry of Jesus. You should have looked around and known. And we also know that the rabbis in the days of Jesus interpreted that text that way, that they were looking for the Messiah. They just were not willing to see it as Jesus. A little bit later on, Jesus is coming down the Mount of Olives, and he stops and he weeps over Jerusalem. And then he says, because you have missed the day of your visitation. They should have known, but they didn't. Now, could the same thing be said to us? Could it be that we know how to tell the weather pretty well, but we cannot discern the times? Because a lot more has been said about what things would be like at the second coming of Jesus than at his first coming. And if anyone should know, it's us, the times and the seasons that we are living in. The Bible tells us that no man knows the day or the hour. And that's true. We shouldn't set dates. We don't know the day he's coming back. But we can certainly know the season, and we can know events that are leading up to it. So if Jesus were among us today, would he say to us, hypocrites, you can tell the weather, but you can't discern the times? Let's see if we can discern the times together. First of all, let's consider Daniel 12:4. Daniel has been given prophecies, some of them about the end of the world, and then he's told to seal it up until the time of the end, when men will go back and forth on the earth and knowledge will increase. That may be a sign that in the day that men start really increasing travel on the earth and knowledge increases is the end times. And we are living in those days when knowledge is increasing at an incredible rate and men truly are traveling all around the world. But the sign that screams to us that we are living in the last days is the reestablishment of the nation of Israel. The Old Testament told us that God was going to bring them back again in the last days and bring a coalition of nations against them. It's interesting that coalition of nations in Ezekiel 38 and 39 are all in place today. All of them are anti-Israel. It's the first time in history that the nations that we can identify in Ezekiel 38 and 39 are all anti-Israel. That should help us to discern the times, that we are right there where that battle could take place. Jesus also gave us a prophecy that would help us to understand what those end times were. In Luke 21:24, Jesus said, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. He's talking about 70 AD when Titus took them captive. He murdered hundreds of thousands of people. He took hundreds of thousands of slaves, destroyed the temple. Jerusalem became nothing more than a heap of rubble. And then Jesus said, Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. In 1967, for the first time since 70 AD, Jerusalem came under Israeli control. And even now, the Temple Mount is being controlled more and more by Israel. We are seeing the days of the Gentiles almost fulfilled. And in Romans, it says that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled, and then they will be saved. Jeremiah 37 talks about the tribulation period and says that it is a time of Jacob's trouble, and they will be saved out of it. God's doing a restoration work with Israel today. He restored the land. He restored the people to the land, and he is also going to restore faith, They are going to believe and receive Jesus as their Messiah. Zechariah 12:10 says, "And God will pour out a spirit of grace and mercy upon Jerusalem, and they will mourn for him as one who mourns for an only son when they look upon me whom they have pierced." That's God speaking in Zechariah, by the way. They will look upon me who they have pierced. And the New Testament tells us that that was fulfilled when they pierced the side of Jesus. Joel 3 verses 1 and 2 give us another passage of God talking about what he's going to do with the nation of Israel. Listen to what it says in Joel 3, 1 and 2. "For behold, in those days and at that time, I will bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, and I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat." This is the battle of Armageddon. God's saying in the last days, he's going to bring Israel back into the land, all the captives of Judah and Jerusalem. And then he's going to bring all nations into the valley of Jehoshaphat. "And I will enter my judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage, who they have scattered among their nations. They have also divided my land." This is an incredible verse that talks about them dividing the land, and they are trying to divide the land today. They have divided the land, and they are trying to divide it even more. And God says that he's going to bring Israel back before the battle of Armageddon. This is incredibly powerful because God did it just as he said. In the early 1900s, Israel was barren and had just a few thousand Jews that lived in it. But now there are several million that live there. And its cities are large and unwalled, just like the Bible prophesied that they would be. Listen to what it says in Isaiah 11, 11 and 12. "It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will set his hand again a second time to recover the remnant of his people that are left from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros and Cush, from Elar and Shinar, from Hamath and the islands of the sea. And he will set a banner for all nations and will assemble the outcast of Israel and will gather the despaired of Judah from the four corners of the earth." Just as God has done it today. The fact that Israel is a nation and became a nation in 1948, the fact that the land was desolate in the middle of the 1800s, and God restored the land, restored the fruitfulness, restored the people to the land, and will restore even the temple being built on the Temple Mount, and the people of Israel finding Jesus as their Messiah is the super sign that we are living in the last days. One more passage, and this is Zechariah 12:3. It says, "And it shall come to pass in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all people." Jerusalem is the cup of trembling for the world. It goes on to say, "And all who would heave it away will surely be cut to pieces. All nations of the earth are gathered against it." There is a day when all the nations of the earth see Israel as the problem, and we're moving quickly towards that day. It is truly the cup of trembling, just as God said. And I wonder, if Jesus were here with us today, would he say, "Hypocrites, you discern the weather, but you can't discern the time"? Are we living in such a way that if Christ were to come back today, we would be ready? We want to get ready. We want to stay ready. Jesus said, "Be ready because you do not know when the Son of Man is returning, and he is going to return at a time that you do not expect him."